via Discord where we're having the conversation, going on to Twitch. Is it less of a carbon footprint to talk with people in video conferencing versus traveling to offices and things like that, would you say?
Yes, yes. I mean, of course it is. It's one of the great things about Google Flights these days, which is what I book my flight through, is that it's now giving you your carbon impact. And so, like, I was adding it all up, and my trip to Scotland to save the planet will be about 3 tons of CO2 emissions.
That's the big paradox of these conferences.
True, true. The conference itself, I mean, just setting that up, not just the air travel, but just all the logistics, everything getting pulled into it. It's yeah, and we all tell ourselves like it's worth it if major gains are happen. So
Has the conference, and it might be on the website, the little bit of research I've done, but I have not seen them post the carbon credits that they've bought to offset any of these things. Is that something that you've seen? Have you seen other conferences do that?
seeing conferences do that, I know that Europe is moving to require its airlines to actually to buy carbon credits for their emissions. I'm not sure if that's happened yet or if that's still in the pipeline. Um, I don't know. That we could go down a whole rabbit
Right.
hole of carbon credits and how they're.
That's not what we're here to talk about today. You are Alice, and you're based at the Middlebury Institute. Talk a little about who you are and what you do at the institute, please.
Sure. I'm an international environmental policy student. This is my second year at the Institute. I've really focused on land use and land management with a strong GIS, essentially map making component. Um, yeah, part of the thing that we do here is this institute has a really big focus on internships, getting professional experience in internships, and that led me to intern with a small NGO called the Leave It in the Ground initiative. And starting in about February, I we started working on this mapping project, which was to essentially map all the fossil fuel below the ground in the world, and then map all of the protected areas in the world, calculate the overlap of those two, find coal, gas, oil resources that are under protected areas. We're figuring out how many gigatons of CO2 emissions that represents. And we're going to be pushing countries to include their protected areas in their NDCs. It's the first step. It's the most logical step. Stop drilling in protected areas. And then we'll start talking about stop drilling everywhere else.
That's interesting. I lived in Alaska for many years, and of course, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of those protected areas, which it sounds like you are describing. And the push for decades to develop that area and develop resources. So that is right at the intersection of conservation, policy, economics. That's really important work. Does it keep you up at night?
Yes, especially, I mean, at this point, a large part of my job, we've been gathering data all year, and so now it's just the spatial analysis. And when you're doing anything global, it's like 6 hours to make a calculation. Yeah, I just to other students listening, when somebody pitches you a project and it includes words like worldwide, global, international, like stop and think for a second.
Those are red flags for time management and emotional stress. Oh, my cat, something has grabbed his attention.
My video might be a little bit choppy because the computer is for the last about 4 hours been grinding through a spatial join operation, with our map making. So it's at this point, my GIS workstation is pretty much pegged at 100% CPU usage for the last 2 weeks.
You mentioned the geographic information system, the GIS, and map making, and I think that we take maps for granted. I believe we have GPSs in our pockets. We're so used to being able to see where we're going, but I think maps are a really underappreciated tool for understanding the world, the boundaries, what's around us. Why do you love maps?
Because they're nicer to look at than a policy report or a graph. Really, I mean, and that's a big thing because they can communicate more information. People are more likely to look at them, like number one. And it's just one of those things that just struck me as a really, really powerful tool. And I love computers and don't like writing long, long reports so much. So like it kind of really is just kind of fallen in for me. It's the map making is, as you're right, like it's such a part of our day that we almost don't think about it. But what's really important are the things that haven't been mapped. Um, a large portion of this summer was we could find oil, gas, global maps. The US Geological Service has that down. But coal, there is no publicly accessible map of the world's coal deposits. I've looked. And so we have spent, me and some other graduate interns and a group of undergrad researchers, we have spent most of the summer going through finding those individual countrywide, sometimes region-wide maps of coal. In many cases, literally going in and zooming all the way in and having to trace old PDF images or things out of reports, just because they're this database doesn't exist, and that's going to be one of the big things that we're looking forward to is releasing this database of the world's coal deposits. Of course, it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. One thing I've come to realize is no map is ever finished. So yeah, we're going to be, one of the things I'll be doing is distributing this map, access to this map, and asking the question, what's wrong with it?
How are you going to
What
be
are
distributing it? You have a QR code on your phone that you're going to say, hey, scan the QR code? Are you going to have copies of the map for people to fold out? Is it an email? How will you get it into the hands and the minds of the people that you want to reach?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely, we're going to be distributing cards that have QR codes that will link to the map. We're going to be we're working with some other organizations. I'll wait to mention them.
Okay.
That are helping us hosting it and also promoting it too as well. So there are other international organizations. I don't think it's been made official yet, but yes, we're working with several organizations to distribute the map through to their stakeholders, and then also at the conference, I will be beating the drum of this map. Because it's really taken about almost a year of mine and several other people's professional lives putting it together. So I'm excited about it. This data set does not publicly exist yet. So
Yeah, and that's a fa I want to ask a little bit about that because it sounds like you might have been dipping into places that companies that are centuries old might have felt was proprietary information, and they don't want you to have it. They don't want claim jumpers to come in and mine their coal in
mhm.
the backyard. Is that something did you run up against conflicts like that?
Not entirely, because a lot of countries, they actually want people, they want foreign investors to come in and build this coal mine. And so we actually find that a lot of this information was listed, but like, at the Ministry of Mining or Extraction or, things like that. Um, it's of course the problem with taking a whole bunch of data sets and sources and bringing them together into one map is like everybody has a slightly different methodology. What's the difference between a coal deposit, a coal resource, a coal reserve? Like these are all different things that have different definitions to them, and so that's probably been one of the biggest things. But we've found data on some surprising places. It's one of the most interesting spots was when I was trying to find coal deposit data for North Korea. For some reason, they were not very forthcoming.
Huh, huh, hmm.
Yeah, and we actually found it. We found a reference in a report from the 1990s to a declassified CIA document, and we dug that up and traced it out off of a scan that had been done of a microfiche.
Wow.
And so,
that was did you, like on the on your monitor, just literally like with a stylus tracing on there, or was it like on paper and tracing paper?
No, no, it's on screen with a stylus, and it's done very, very carefully because that was one of the things that we were very nervous about because, well, will it be accurate enough? You know, it's like you want to make sure that when you're publishing something like this, that you're accurate. And so yeah, and we had a whole bunch of, rules within. I think we were using a minimum of like 20 to 30 points to geolocate like where things are, and this is a multi-step process, just because quite often the maps that we have that are source are in a completely different projection from the map that we're building. And so like the first step is actually stretching the images into the correct projection and then carefully point by point. In some cases, some of these countries have, there's hundreds of points, making those new polygons and then adding them to our database.
That's a lot to think about. What an amazing project. I'm so excited that you'll get to put it out in the world and just keep on working as you get edits and corrections and things like that. My question about that for the creating of the data visualization of the map, what colors did you use for things? Did you have a color bank that you chose from? Were that arguments among the team? How did you pick the colors?
We call it the symbology, and this is definitely one case where I think I've become the symbology czar. We are working with another organizer, with some other people that are going to be finalizing that symbology, colors and things like that. But no, generally, I think settled on green for protected areas. That one was easy. And then we used orange for a translucent orange for oil and gas, and then a purple for coal. And I guess I kind of took that from like the California like air warning system where it's like past red, there's purple, and
That's
coal
really
is
dangerous.
past. Yeah, coal is like way past red.
And it's interesting because there's so much talk about the coal industry in the United States and the decline of that industry and trying to find
Grew
clean coal and all of that sort of stuff. So
Mining grew this last year in the U.S.
interesting.
Coal mining actually accelerated.
There's got to be economists out there that could talk about why that might be. Does that concern you for the work that you do, trying to think about leave it in the ground, that place your internship that you're interning with, and like, would you like to see no more coal mining, or is there a balance for resource development and mitigating the climate crisis? There is not.
Here's the thing about CO2. We can talk about methane, fluorinated chemicals, all of that. But CO2 stays in the atmosphere for hundreds, if not thousands of years. There are still CO2 molecules floating around in the air from the burning of Rome in AD 60, 64. It's just, and that's why, and it's like, yes, there's a certain amount every year that does kind of get absorbed and handled, in the atmosphere. But it's um, solar radiation, hits the particles and breaks them apart and turns them into, into other things. But um, yeah, we've we've run out of runway. We have to stop emissions, and we have to bring emissions to zero, essentially, if not negative overall, because we've run it up so high. The amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is so high. And if we stop right now, today, it's still going to be at that level for hundreds of years. Um, and so because of that, a lot of the damage is baked in, and it's like, how much worse are we going to let it get? And so that's why we need a rapid scale down of carbon dioxide emissions, or along with other emissions. I mean, methane's important, but that goes away after a decade or two. Um, yeah, it's really the CO2 that it's just this is something that's been building up cumulatively, and it's going to stick with us for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Yeah.
Do you think the summit that you're going to be traveling to in that suitcase I see right behind you there, I'm assuming your guitar is not going in the suitcase. Um, are these important, or is this just performative? We're going to get together and talk about how bad things are, or will it actually be productive, do you think, for the future?
Good question. End of interview. No,
I'm out of here.
um, right. So I mean, there's two problems, and this is countries setting NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that are too low. And then there's the second problem, and nationally determined is saying like we're going to reduce CO2 levels by emissions by this amount. That's called a nationally determined contribution. And there's two problems. A lot of the nationally determined contributions are way too low. The cuts that are being promised by countries are way too low. And we know they're way too low because we can say, okay, well, they're committing to cut it by, 10% or something like that by 2050. Well, we can go ahead and model out what the CO2 levels will be, and we can say, no, that's going to take us to 3 degrees of warming. I think we're currently on track for. Um, yeah, so that's actually a pretty easy to find problem. The second one, of course, is countries not meeting their nationally determined contributions. So it's like we have a problem where promises are being made that are too weak, and then they're not getting kept. It's a double compound problem.
And there's
Um,
no global climate enforcement agency that is traveling around making sure that people uphold the words that they say.
Well, this is the problem of all international policy, is that it's all done on handshakes and like, yep, absolutely, we'll commit. But there's no global peace. There's no global police, to police it. Which is why I get really interested in things like carbon adjustment tariffs and things like that, where countries that are reducing their CO2, well, products made from those countries, they will be tariffed. Essentially, they will have to pay fees for that. And the idea is to make it commercially untenable to continue emissions. And I think that's a really interesting strategy. Um, One thing I'm very against is kind of the continuation of our carbon markets. They were a great idea maybe 20 or 30 years ago, when it was like, okay, we're going to reduce CO2 emissions by buying reductions elsewhere. But here's the problem. We need to get to zero. Like, the industrialized world needs to get to zero. The developing world needs to get to zero. And we need to do it fast. There's this whole ratcheting up scheme where, oh, over time there'll be less and less credits available. Like that's just, it's not feasible. And yeah, so
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's no,
Opinions.
as I heard, there was in other preparation stuff I've heard on the radio, it was some countries, they double bill some of these carbon credits. They say, oh, we're buying it here, but then it's not counted in some of these other. It seems like just a shell game. We're hiding it from one place to another, but there's no.
Just replace it with palm oil plantations, and then take the credits then take the CO2 absorption credits from the palm oil plants. Yeah, I've literally seen that.
So it's a problem that's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah. So
What's your big hope for your time there at COP27?
one of the big things that everybody's hoping to kind of figure out at COP26
Oh,
is,
26. Thank you.
um, it's okay, right? You're thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Um, one of the big things that everybody's looking for, like one of the big things that people are hoping to kind of get sorted out there, is this thing we call Article 6, which was in the original Paris Climate Agreement. And that was to set up these climate markets. And you're right, as you mentioned, they've been rife with double dealing and just things. And so a large part of the emphasis at the conference is going to be trying to figure out what Article 6 means. It was kind of written in a very non-definitive way, I guess you would say. And so they're hoping to go and figure that out. So a lot of my attention that I'm going to be watching is looking at what happens with these Article 6 negotiations, because um, because again, it's the carbon markets at this point have just, they've become worse than useless. In fact, they've become greenwashing, or um, and it's just I have a very, very low view of them. I could see them working, but only if it's like we're setting up a carbon market, a carbon credit trading market, and the available credits are going to go down to zero by like 2030 or something. Like, I mean, it's just we don't have decades.
That term that you just used, I had not heard before, but that's fascinating. I know exactly sort of intuitively what it means is greenwashing. And
Greenwashing.
and this it what it sounds to me like it is it looks much more effective at mitigating climate crisis effects than it really does. In fact, it just sounds good for a company or a government to greenwash some of their policies or the choices that they make. Is that the way to think about that term?
Exactly. We've been doing a lot of that. My favorite example is British Petroleum becoming Beyond Petroleum.
That's
Like that's like
greenwashing.
the classic form of greenwashing. And we don't just see it from private companies, but we see it from entire countries. Um, Again, like I mentioned, countries trying to count their brand new palm plantations, you know, as as biofuel sources or carbon absorption spots. When well, no, there definitely wasn't tropical forest here before.
Let alone what we're trying to build now. Alice, thank you for taking some time to talk with me today, get this whole thing set up. I know you've got a lot of preparation to do. You might even have coursework and some other school stuff to do before you leave. Maybe not. I know, who knows? I'm sure you're.
Yes. No, no, it's yeah, definitely managing all those things. It's one of my things that I told myself this semester was that I was not going to overcommit, and I failed. So
You're
that
ambitious, and that's what has connected us today. Thank you. We'll talk to you again in a couple on the 9th of November. You'll be in Glasgow on that day. You'll be in the midst of it, so we'll pull a little bit of time just to check in, see if the when is there a press release I should look out for the map project that you're working on?
um, yes, and I don't know when it's going to come
That's okay.
out.
We'll find out. It might be on that day. We'll stay in touch. We'll be able to share that. It's really nice to meet you. I'm going to stop the stream, but stay on Discord. We'll just get caught up here really quick before I let you go. Thank you.
Thanks.